If it's Thursday, primary politics and probes. Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump hit the campaign trail in Iowa and New Hampshire as they both face a growing field of rivals and new questions about both their candidacies. Plus, the tale of the tape. NBC News has confirmed that Special Counsel Jack Smith now has audio of the former president apparently admitting to keeping classified material after he left office in what could be the key piece of evidence in this criminal probe. And Senate leaders are hoping to move at warp speed after the House passed the deal to raise the debt limit that was brokered by President Biden and Speaker McCarthy. There's still just days to go until a potential default. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting in Washington, where we are following a very busy day on the 2024 campaign trail. Frontrunner Donald Trump is in Iowa and facing new legal peril. And Ron DeSantis is in New Hampshire facing new questions about his campaign's strength and strategy. DeSantis is barnstorming early states, pitching primary voters as the candidate to go up against what he calls the woke mind virus.
We will go into office recognizing that this woke mind virus represents a war on the truth. And so we must wage a war on woke. We will fight the woke in the schools. We will fight the woke in the corporations. We will fight the woke in the halls of Congress. We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. We've made the state of Florida the place where woke goes to die. As president, we're going to leave woke in the dustbin of history where it belongs.
His trip to New Hampshire follows a two-day swing in Iowa, which is shaping up to be mission critical to the DeSantis campaign. It may be extremely hard to see how DeSantis wins the Republican nomination without winning the state of Iowa, and it's nearly impossible to see how he wins it without winning Iowa. DeSantis has his work cut out for him in winning Iowa. In addition to peeling away votes from Trump, he's going to have to contend with a still growing Republican field. 3 more candidates are throwing their hats into the ring next week, including former Vice President Mike Pence. And Pence is a favorite of true blue, principled evangelical voters, a key coalition for DeSantis in Iowa. And Iowa is where President Trump is today, making a 2-day swing of his own, where he is sounding very bullish on his own chances. Take a listen.
I said, there's no way we lose Iowa. I got China to give them, for their farmers, $28 billion. There's no way I can lose Iowa. Let's see what happens. I don't think so. We'd have to do some really bad things to lose at this point, because it's been amazing how far. It's the best polls we've ever had. Overall, nationwide, in Iowa, no matter where I go, it's the best polls because they love the 4 years that we had.
We should note, as experts pointed out at the time, the tens of billions of dollars in aid the Trump administration gave to farmers didn't come from China. It came from you and me, U.S. taxpayers, to stem losses from Trump's trade war with China. Trump's Iowa swing comes as new details emerge about his ongoing legal jeopardy. An informed source has confirmed to NBC News that Special Counsel Jack Smith has obtained a tape of Donald Trump discussing a classified document, while acknowledging that the document was indeed still classified and that he took it after leaving office. The evidence appears to undercut Trump's already dubious claim that everything he took had somehow been automatically declassified. He could just think it, remember? The news comes amid growing speculation that the special counsel could be nearing a decision on charges. But it is not at all clear what his legal peril could mean for Trump's position in the Republican primary. Because when Trump was indicted this spring by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts tied to hush money payments he made in 2016, Republicans didn't run away from him. They rallied around him. So let's get right to the campaign trail. Gabe Gutierrez is following Ron DeSantis in New Hampshire. Vaughn Hilliard is following Donald Trump in Iowa. And also with us for more insight on the ever-crucial Hawkeye State is the Des Moines Register's chief politics reporter, Brianne Fannin-Steele. Let me start in New Hampshire with Gabe. Gabe, look, if you look at the history of past winners of Iowa, if they have been powered by evangelical voters in Iowa, they have hit a wall in New Hampshire. It is not nearly as socially conservative as Iowa. Is DeSantis finding a crowd that's ready to rally with him, or is this going to be a tougher sell for him?
Well, Chuck, it will be a very tough sell. As you laid out, the math is very difficult, but his campaign does see an opening. They think that, roughly a third, about 35% of the GOP primary electorate will go for former President Trump. About 20% is never Trump. They think these more moderate candidates, establishment candidates, will split that vote and essentially cancel each other out. And then they see potentially the other 45% being the sweet spot for Governor DeSantis. The question is, will that actually happen? A couple interesting things I saw today, Chuck. I was able to get a question into Governor DeSantis in one of his events earlier today. He did seem more engaged with voters, at least at this event, taking questions from them along the rope line, and his team did allow reporters to film that. I asked him several questions, and as you know, Chuck, sometimes it's very telling what a candidate chooses to engage on and what he doesn't. In this case, he did not engage on any questions regarding the classified documents and investigation involving former President Trump. He did engage and fired back a response when I asked him about this idea. Earlier in the day, former President Trump had said that he could fix the U.S. in 6 months, and this comes after Governor DeSantis earlier in the week in his stump speech said that it'd take him 2 terms to turn around the country, undoing the damage of Democrats. I asked Governor DeSantis what he made of former President Trump's response that he'd do this in 6 months. And DeSantis immediately fired back. He said, why didn't he do it in 4 years? So he was clearly wanting to establish that contrast with former President Trump. I want to get to some of the voters I spoke with really quickly in Iowa yesterday. We were in Iowa yesterday, in New Hampshire today. Take a listen to what they had to say as this field started to get even bigger. Take a listen.
Did you support former President Trump?
Absolutely.
You did. So this time around, do you think, are you leaning more towards Governor DeSantis or former President Trump?
We'll see how things play out. I love Trump's policies. I struggle with his personality.
Just today, though, we heard that Chris Christie and Mike Pence are getting in next week. What do you make of this crowded GOP field?
I'm only going to work on these two.
So, yeah, Chuck, big question there. Will he gained momentum? If he does well in Iowa, does this translate into New Hampshire? Well, we still got 7 months to figure it out. He's going to South Carolina tomorrow, Governor DeSantis says. Chuck.
Gabe, does the campaign acknowledge that this growing field is a bit of a reflection on his rough start?
Again, as you know, Chuck, they will try to spin it, and they keep saying, well, it wasn't as rough of a start as everybody's making it out to be. It just shows that there's interest. But certainly, there was a divide internally in the campaign whether the Twitter route was the way to go. Look, they see it as they have an incredible amount of money to play with here in the next coming months. And they just think that if they can build a momentum and build something in these early primary states because they do have enough money to throw at this problem, now that he's a formal candidate, now that in their view he can go after former President Trump, although, again, he doesn't do it in the stump, he waits till reporters ask him questions, they think over the next coming months the tide will turn. But as Chris Christie has said, look, in 2016, the GOP candidates thought that, they were waiting to take Trump on one-on-one, and it didn't work out then. Some of DeSantis' critics say it's happening all over again, Chuck.
Yeah, no, it is, some of us went through this a few times. Looks awfully familiar. Gabe Gutierrez on the ground in New Hampshire. Let's move over to Iowa, where we find Vaughn Hilliard. And let's say what the huge story is. Donald Trump spent the night in Iowa. Donald Trump, Vaughn, spent the night in a state where he owns no hotel. He did not sleep in a bed that he technically owns. I know we're all sort of laughing about this, but this is only the second time he's ever spent the night in Iowa as a presidential candidate.
Right. He's now matched what he did in 2015, 2016. Now he's got 18 months to double that. It's notable because Ron DeSantis, by comparison, made stops in 6 different Iowa towns over the 48 hours he was here. Usually Donald Trump flies into a city every couple weeks, holds his mega rally, and then he flies back home to either Florida or Bedminster. And that was notable that he flew in yesterday and is going to be taking off tonight. But, the interesting part here with Chuck is when you're talking about Donald Trump and a lot of the criticism towards Ron DeSantis, is he willing to answer questions? Well, we went around to 3 different stops of Donald Trump today, and it was suggested to us that he was going to talk to reporters at some point. And at each stop, we were ultimately denied. He is now heading to his 4th stop, we should note, which is a town hall with Sean Hannity that is set to air tonight. Of course, usually the questions that come from that particular moderator are not usually reflective perspective of the greater media's questioning. So it's notable that Donald Trump continues to steer clear of straightforward questions, especially at the heart of the special counsel's investigation as it unfolds.
So how would you say he did in Iowa today? I mean, is he, he doesn't do it traditionally. He doesn't do the things that every other person that's an expert about Iowa caucus politics would tell you you should do. He's like a speech and then he sort of walks away. What have you seen? Has he done anything different than his usual shtick?
Well, that's the difference was instead of one big mega rally, he did 3 small stops. He stopped and met with faith leaders. He stopped a West Side Conservative Club, a group just west of Des Moines that is made up of more of your kind of suburban Republican types. I was talking to one particular couple who, came to see him. They caucused for him this go around. They said they're sticking by him another time. I talked to somebody else who caucused for Jeb Bush 8 years ago, yet came into that room to hear him speak. Then he was here at a community center talking with another small group of folks. And so it's different. And they're going to try to make the case that they are doing retail politicking and that Donald Trump is taking Iowa seriously. And, when we're talking about the kind of twofold parallel tracks of the political one and the investigative one here, Chuck, I want to let you hear a little bit of him addressing that conservative group outside of Des Moines today, because he didn't talk about the classified documents specifically, but he talked about the Department of Justice and the attack that he says that he has endured over the years. Take a listen.
This is years and years of entrenchment, years and years of radicalism. It's really radicalism, and it's putting our country at great danger. I mean, I'm fighting them all the time, and I think one of the reasons I'm doing so, because I've really fought them successfully, and we were making tremendous problems. But this is numerous presidents, long-term. People are embedded in those positions, and they hate us. They hate our values. They hate what we stand for.
I was talking, Chuck, to one close ally of Trump's down in Florida here who told me that Trump will continue to hammer home on this because of Ron DeSantis is a big part of this. Essentially, Ron DeSantis over the next 8 months is going to have to make a decision. Does he echo what Donald Trump just told this Iowa crowd in that there is this deep state that exists that is coming to attack the MAGA movement? Or does he throw Donald Trump under the bus, somebody who is still a popular figure by and large within this Republican Party? These next 8 months are going to be so much about the politics of it and policy, but also the investigations that find Donald Trump that he finds himself in the heart of.
That's the million-dollar question. How do the legal developments impact this race? That's what we're all waiting to find out. Vaughn Hilliard on the ground with the Trump campaign. Vaughn, thank you. Let me bring in the Des Moines Register's chief political reporter, Brianne Fannin-Steele. So, Brianne, the last 3 Iowa Republican caucus goer winners all came arguably from the evangelical wing of the party: Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee. None of them became the nominee. It is clear that this is the DeSantis strategy. So let's start there. Is the evangelical vote there to be taken away from Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. This is a group of caucus goers who show up in disproportionate numbers. They caucus pretty, you can count on them to show up, so to speak. And so this is a group that Ron DeSantis is really going to be trying to reach out to. They've been supporters of Donald Trump in the past, and it's maybe not an obvious pairing, but it's one that he's delivered for them. That he certainly comes to the state and will argue that he's the person who paved the way for Roe versus Wade to be overturned. And that is a huge issue for Iowa evangelicals. And so he's coming into the state now, and we're seeing an interesting back and forth over the abortion issue today. Ron DeSantis, of course, signed a 6-week abortion ban in Florida. Donald Trump said that was maybe too harsh. And so at this event this morning at the West Side Conservatives Club, the Never Back Down PAC, which is supporting Ron DeSantis, had its bus parked outside and was putting flyers on cars, kind of critiquing Donald Trump's stance on abortion and saying that he's not strong enough on these pro-life issues. So that's a really clear indication that Ron DeSantis plans to go after Donald Trump from the right in a direct effort to get these evangelical caucus goers on his side. So
I was talking with Dave Kochel on my podcast. By the way, he had great things to say about your reporting, for what it's worth. And he made a note. He said that Trump's strength really comes from this is going to be an odd way to say it, but the coasts of Iowa, the river towns, whether it's Council Bluffs in the west or Dubuque and northeast Iowa, all along the Mississippi there. Besides those areas, where else does Trump have strength?
I mean, I think we're going to be seeing him compete in the major population centers. He has a huge advantage coming into this race in that he has a massive stockpile of data of people who have been supporters of him before. He has their phone numbers, he has their email addresses, and they're going to be reaching out to them as much as possible. And so in terms of trying to get people into his events, committing to caucus for him, I think you're really going to see him go to these major population centers to win over these people and cement their support going into the caucuses. And that's an advantage, but it also leaves an opening for someone like Ron DeSantis, for someone like Tim Scott to come in and go into these smaller communities, to go into places where it's tough for Donald Trump to show up. He has a massive amount of security detail that can make it difficult to do these smaller events that we're seeing. So it creates an opening and it's an advantage.
All right, let me talk about Mike Pence and Tim Scott, the other two that I think could have some traction in Iowa. Pence is in some ways the more principled, potentially social conservative here. Is he viewed that way among some leaders in the social conservative movement there in Iowa?
The Republicans who I'm talking to about Mike Pence, who is set to launch his campaign with a Des Moines rally next week, you know, they like Mike Pence. They respect Mike Pence. They view him as being a very principled conservative. They think he's doing this for the right reasons. But there's always a but after that. They just don't know that he's exciting enough. They don't know that he's going to be able to bring new people in. They're really struggling to kind of see the lane for him going forward. So every time you talk to people about Mike Pence, they like him, but.
Interesting. That's a good way of putting it. I'm going to go away from that a lot, Brianne. I like him, but. Tim Scott, he strikes me as the West Des Moines candidate. Am I overstating it?
Yeah, I think, you know, you could draw parallels to maybe Marco Rubio, who spent a lot of time in the suburban Des Moines areas trying to get kind of that moderate suburban, you know, maybe Chamber of Commerce style Republican. But we're also seeing him spend a lot of time in Northwest Iowa, where there is a big base of those evangelical caucus goers that we're talking about, those very conservative folks who are also very religious. So they're on the far right of the spectrum, but they're, you know, rooted in their faith, which is something that Tim Scott talks a lot about. And they see him as being a very authentic messenger for that issue. And so it'll be interesting to see whether he spends time in central Iowa or whether he's really courting kind of that Northwest Iowa caucus goer.
Brianna, Fannin from the Des Moines Register. I have a feeling we're going to see you a lot and we'll get much better at pronouncing your last name. Brianna, thanks so much. Joining me now to dive more into the legal aspect of Donald Trump and what he's facing, Andrew Weissman, former FBI general counsel and an NBC News analyst. Andrew, welcome. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Let me start with this audio and what it does say to us and what it doesn't. On one hand, he is apparently caught on tape saying he's aware of what the classification is of said document. On the other hand, he seems to be taking precautions. Are we supposed to believe he was concerned that he couldn't share these things? What do you make of everything you understand about this audio and how potentially incriminating it is?
I think that I don't see the other hand here, frankly. If the tape exists and the underlying document exists, that is, we have the reporting on it, assuming that is all true, and assuming there is this underlying document, this is such strong evidence. This was already a very strong case, but to have a defendant on tape saying that he is possessing a classified document, remember, he's not supposed to have any government documents at all, whether classified or not, and this is saying on tape that he has possessed it. Remember, there are times when I was a prosecutor, you don't bring a case because the quality of the proof isn't that good. For instance, in the Alvin Bragg case, a lot of people talk about, well, Michael Cohen will be a witness, but Michael Cohen has lots and lots of baggage. But when you have a case like Mar-a-Lago, where in addition to the search, the documents that were found, the defendants, that is Donald Trump's inconsistent statements over and over again, the fact that there's so many witnesses who appear to have told him he cannot keep classified information, his dribbling out information back to the archives. But now you have a tape recording where he is saying, I possess a classified document. The only kind of precaution he says is, I can't give it to you. I can't read from it because it's a classified document. Well, that's not a defense to unlawful retention of a document.
Right.
And even his own statement actually reveals content, because the reason we know that that document relates to plans to declare war on Iran is because the reporting is that's what Donald Trump said the document contained. So he actually is disseminating, if the reporting is true, information from that document. So this is a kind of win-win-win document, the tape recording and the witnesses to it.
I was just going to say the document matters a lot here as well, because is Donald Trump's history of lying a potential defense for him?
So the answer to that's no, for the following reason.
Mm-hmm.
If the document that he is describing does not exist, in other words, the whole thing is just his bluffing, the evidence on that tape is still useful to show his state of mind. But all the reporting to date is that that document that he's describing does exist. And obviously Jack Smith is going to know, for sure, one way or the other, whether it does or not. But the other thing is, when you think about all of the various defenses that we've heard, many totally inconsistent, like the documents were planted, to I had every right to take the documents. Just imagine the chart that the government is going to use in opening and in summation of all of the inconsistent statements that Donald Trump made. To me, it reminds me very much of what happened in the E. Jean Carroll sexual assault case, where the plaintiff there used Donald Trump's own words and inconsistent statements to prove her case. And I think that is what we're going to see in the Mar-a-Lago case when it's brought.
Is there still a deal to be cut? If you were Jack Smith and Trump's lawyers said, all right, look, he took these documents, he didn't do this, he didn't sell them, he didn't do this, what can we, can we make a deal? Is it too late?
Well, this is where it helps that I know Jack Smith. So I'd say the deal that Jack Smith would accept is, if you want to plead guilty to a felony of unlawful retention and obstruction of the government investigation, then that's the deal. It's hard to imagine that Donald Trump would do that, because then he'd be admitting his guilt from his own mouth. And he seems, as a political matter, wanting to say all of this is just made up. So he can't really take that position that he's accepting responsibility. So I think, just as a practical matter, the government would insist on a plea that I think would be righteous for them to insist on that, because that is what they've done in numerous cases that appear to be far less egregious than the one against Donald Trump.
Do you expect Jack Smith to bring all the charges at once, or do you expect this to be piecemealed out?
Great question. So I think Mar-a-Lago, I would expect him to bring it all at once. The reason I say that is I think that there probably will be a lot of internal pressure that he will feel to get this case to trial. If he does this piecemeal, for instance, you're allowed to bring an indictment, but then to continue the investigation and to do something called a superseding indictment, which is essentially like a second indictment. The problem with doing that is that it delays going to trial. And so here, I think that there'll be concern about the American public really needing to know the answer to whether Donald Trump is guilty or not guilty of these offenses, which a jury will decide. And frankly, although I don't think he thinks this way, Donald Trump would be entitled to that as well. In other words, everyone should have their day in court, the government and Donald Trump, and it should be decided so the American public knows that in advance of the election.
Well, and very quickly, what about January 6th? Do you think that's a separate, that would be separated out?
Yeah, well, it cannot legally be brought in the same charging instrument. It is possible, Chuck, that they would be brought at the same time. The only reason I think that may not happen is that that's just a more, sprawling case. There's just more to do. It's conceivable that they would be brought at the same time, but I don't think so. I just think there's more to do.
Andrew Weissman, who has an incredibly clean desk for a lawyer. Amazing there behind you, Mr. Weissman. Thank you, as always, for providing your expertise.
You're welcome.
Coming up, we're going to dig deeper into the state of the GOP race, the future of the party, former president's ability to defy political gravity despite these mounting legal problems. Panel is next. Plus, it's going to be a long, hot hurricane season, how record warm ocean temperatures and climate change are going to complicate this year's storm predictions. Good news, fewer storms. Bad news, more powerful. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we've noted, former President Trump has a way of defying the laws of political gravity. As the former president campaigns in Iowa, he faces criminal charges in New York. He could face more charges from a range of ongoing and escalating criminal probes. And yet, he has grown his lead in the Republican presidential primary, with some of his supporters in Iowa telling NBC News today that even an indictment from the special counsel's office wouldn't dissuade them, not one bit.
The stuff we're seeing is so silly. I mean, this is child play. We go after him, we go to Mar-a-Lago and we get documents and so on. For God's sakes, he was the president. He has the right to take things and declassify, and so we make a big deal of it. And what do we find with our current president? I mean, I don't want to use that as an excuse, but everything they throw at him is the things they're guilty of. And you talk about his popularity, every time they go after him again, he just skyrockets.
There you go. I'm joined by my panel today. Eugene Daniels, White House correspondent for Politico, co-author of Playbook. He's also an NBC News political analyst, former Democratic Senator from Alabama, Doug Jones, and Sarah Longwell, the publisher of The Bulwark. Eugene, every morning when we have our morning meeting, all right, what are we going to lead with today? We sit there and it's like the DeSantis-Trump question like hangs over our heads every day. I bet you Sarah has a similar conversation with her team every day, and you do too, and it's the same question. Well, I think I know where this is headed, but how many indictments can Trump handle? And that's the question we just don't know, right? The straw that broke the camel's back is a cliche for a reason. Yeah. Is any of these indictments a straw?
Yeah, it's hard to know, right? And what you heard from that voter right there was them parroting exactly what Donald Trump has been saying. Things that aren't true about the Presidential Records Act, right? That he can just go and wave a wand and declassify things. He doesn't have to tell anybody. There's no documentation needed, that doesn't matter. That's not true. And so what it tells you is that it's so deep within the Republican base. He has such a handle on the folks that like him and have liked him for so long that it's hard to see how DeSantis or any of them are able to pull that away from them. When you heard them talking about how these indictments are child's play, whatever it was, like that is, for every Republican strategist, I would be nervous if I was them, because how do you get beyond that if they're not going to believe that these indictments are true? Because Republicans have spent a long time denigrating these same institutions that are now taking Donald Trump on.
Sarah, my podcast this week, I was talking about Dave Kochel, who's a longtime Republican operative in Iowa, and he's done a bunch of focus groups with Republican caucus goers, and he says, it's extraordinary, the excuses Trump supporters come up for Trump. And he says, you got to hand it to Trump. He's brilliant. He has fed them what you just said, Eugene. What that voter said is what Trump told him to say.
And here's the thing. So I do the focus groups all the time.
That's right.
Every
you guys do a
week,
ton of them.
Two-time Trump voters. And what they say about the indictments are it's political. And the reason it helps them is they also say it's because they're too scared of Trump. They're out to get him. The deep state wants to get him. And that to them is a testament to Trump's power. It's a testament to why he's the right one, because we wouldn't be so scared of him if he wasn't so dangerous to the establishment and to us. Yeah. But I will say, I don't think the indictments are ever going to hurt him. And I think that might be the wrong question. I think the question is there another Republican, DeSantis, who has the political talent to make hay of it, to go through Trump? And right now, nobody has. You know, you can make these indictments work against Trump, but none of the other candidates are willing to do it because Trump has this crazy power of they come to his defense. And as long as these other candidates come to his defense, he's fine.
Doug, Brad Todd, who's a Republican operative, has this theory. He says the reason Trump supporters back him up all the time is he thinks everybody is trying to make 2016 an asterisk. That by, and these voters, they don't want to erase Trump. Maybe they'll move on from Trump, but acknowledge he mattered. Like there's this, hey, this mattered. Don't sit here and say this was an accident.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. But I think, Chuck, I think there's another element of this, too. I faced this in my 2017 race when those allegations about Roy Moore came out. People that supported him did not want to believe those allegations. They
How could they? This is the man. He's so moral.
Exactly.
He tells us all the time.
And it's this. And there's a lot of that, I think, with Trump. When you indict Donald Trump, you're indicting his supporters in their mind. And so I think that breaking through to that is very difficult when you've got a very, very strong base of support. So, yeah, I think there's all of that that's in play here. And that's why I think that these guys are going to have a difficult time talking about the so-called character issue. It hadn't worked yet. And these people are seeing that as personal attacks because they were so invested in Donald Trump.
Human beings, we have a difficulty saying when we're wrong, right? And
Exactly.
so by going to DeSantis or trying to wish away Donald Trump, these voters are going to have to say, I was wrong that time, or I've been tricked this entire time. And it's very hard for human beings to do that. So there's like a psychology to this.
I remember at post-Clinton impeachment, Sarah, when a lot of people had to be reminded, voters knew before Bill Clinton was elected that he had a wandering eye. And, oh, so you're impeaching him for that? We already knew that.
Right.
Voters knew who Donald Trump was when they elected him. And I think sometimes we don't fully appreciate that. Voters knew what they were getting.
It's all baked in.
Yeah, and
it's
that's
all baked in.
And so we're sitting there telling them, hey, he's all this. Well, you told us he was all this before.
I keep making this joke. Like, what is DeSantis's Oppo team gonna do? Like, how are they gonna spend their time? We know everything. We know all the bad. Are they gonna tell us he slept with a porn
He's
star?
trying every trick that Ted Cruz tried. He's not a real conservative.
Totally.
My goodness, I used to have this MASH we used to play. Rick Perry, he's a cancer on conservatism. And, you know, it's right down the line, all these people. It didn't matter.
It's also, DeSantis' whole strategy is the Ted Cruz strategy. It's like, I'm going to go after Trump's base. I'm going to hug him as hard as I can and then hope some exogenous event takes him out and then I'm the last man standing. It hasn't worked for anybody yet. And so I will say I have just seen lately a few signs of life from DeSantis where he is trying to go right at Trump. He's taking him on a little harder. And I think that's what he needs to do. Like, if you're going to be the man, you got to beat the man. You can't go around Trump. You got to go through him. And so the question again is, does Ron DeSantis have the political talent to do that effectively?
No, and that's what the beauty of presidential campaigns is, that it is, somebody said this to me, a Senate race or a governor's race can be won with tactics. A presidential race, the candidate matters.
Absolutely. And the fact is that the more people get into that primary process, I think it helps Donald Trump. Everybody says that. Everybody knows that. You're seeing Mike Pence. You're seeing Chris Christie looking at jumping in. The bigger that is, the more people that may try to attack him, the others that are going to defend him, he's going to sit back and say, fine, y'all duke it out.
The Chris Christie, I'm trying to think of another campaign where the candidate says, I'm only running to just get rid of that guy. You know, like Pat Buchanan ran in '92 to make a statement. He knew he wasn't going to win, but he wanted to make a statement. Arguably, Ron Paul ran to make a statement. Bernie Sanders, I think the first time, was more in making a statement. I don't know how a candidacy that is totally based on revenge works.
Yeah. His hope is to do what he did to Marco Rubio to Donald Trump.
Well,
right?
you got to get on the stage.
You have to get on the stage.
You have to get on the stage and hope you have that moment.
Exactly.
Why would Donald Trump hand him that moment?
He's not going to. And also, Donald Trump has made it clear he's not super interested in getting on the stage. In his eyes, he is, as he said over and over again, I'm the front runner. Why do I need to get on stage with the losers? Right? That is how he is thinking about this. And so if you're Chris Christie, your only chance is to knock him down in person. It can't be in a bunch of interviews. It can't be on stage talking to your supporters. It has to be one-on-one, or at least face-to-face with Donald Trump.
And Sarah, we know what's going to happen. There won't be a pile on Trump. There'll be somebody that angles and says, oh, no, and says, oh, I'll play fullback for Donald Trump.
Right.
Yeah, which Chris Christie did last time.
Yes, he did.
And look, they won't be able to resist.
This time it's the nose tackle. He was the fullback last time. This time it's the nose tackle.
That's right. And they're also not going to be able to resist the idea of like, well, I need to be mano-a-mano with Trump. I need to be second, which means they're all going to be tempted to go after DeSantis, which is one of Trump's big structural advantages, is everyone's going to try to get to that #2 spot and hit DeSantis while ignoring him, and that's going to go on too long. Before you know it, it's all over.
All right, I'm not going to let this pass. None of you may care about this, but when your boy-heard baseball hero says he's going to run for the United States Senate, I want to throw it out there. Steve Garvey is thinking about running for California Senate. He's supposedly going to run more as a moderate Republican. I do think Doug Jones, he'd be better off running as independent. A Republican can't win a statewide race in California.
Right.
but an independent might.
Maybe.
I'm doubtful of that, too.
Look, I am very doubtful of independent candidacies these days, whether it is in California, Alabama, or in nationally running for president.
I'm sure there's some people in Alabama says, well, the Democratic Party brand is bad. Try an independent candidacy, right?
I had a lot of people talking to me about that, and I kept telling them that, no, look, things are so tribal these days that at the end of the day, people are going to vote for a Republican or a Democrat regardless. So, look, I think, Steve Garvey is a baseball hero to a lot of people. I think he's a great guy.
A lot of people my age and older, though.
Yeah,
that's kind of the problem.
Who vote.
That's true. They do vote, as somebody pointed out. Yeah.
But, at the same time, whether that translates into something you can mount a campaign, I think is to be seen.
It is a top 2 state, though, and the Republican primary will be on that day, which means there will be the highest Republican turnout. And so the chances of him making it to the top 2 are not good.
I think he's very likely in the top 2.
Yeah.
By the way, the other interesting thing, Adam Schiff voted for the debt ceiling. The other 2 in the Democratic primary, Porter and Lee, did not.
Wow.
Wonder if that's going to be an ads.
Yeah, you would think so. It's going to pop up at least once or twice or 4 or 10 times during the process.
From both angles. Anyway, California politics is going to be a lot of fun. May not matter to the presidential race, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Eugene, Doug, and Sarah, great to see you guys. Up next, Senate leaders are urging members not to throw up any roadblocks as the chamber tries to move quickly to take up the debt limit deal. Just a few days until the potential default. We're live on Capitol Hill with the latest Senate developments. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The effort to raise the debt ceiling and avoid a potential default on our debt is now in the hands of the U.S. Senate after the House last night overwhelmingly passed the deal struck between President Biden and Speaker McCarthy. More Democrats, 165, voted for this deal versus Republicans, 149. And a bill passed 314 to 117, which is 4 days to a potential default. Potential Senate leaders Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell both collectively have been urging quick action. Ali Vitale joins me now on Capitol Hill. So, Ali, it seems like everything's smooth-ish. What could knock this off the tracks? What could keep the Senate here through the weekend?
Not getting an agreement on how long this is going to take. You know this well. If all 100 senators come to the table and say, let's do this quickly, tonight, tomorrow, it gets done. Getting them to say yes to that, though, in this instance, requires an agreement on amendments. That's what they're still actively trying to figure out. The latest that we've heard is that maybe there's 10, maybe there's 12 amendment votes. And when I spoke with Senator John Thune just about an hour and a half or so ago, he still thinks that this could all come together tonight, and it could be a late night. But at least that means that we are well ahead of schedule, and certainly senators love not having to work the weekend, too.
Who is trying to gum it up, or are the usual suspects only half-hearted about this?
It's pretty half-hearted because I think everyone, when you say smooth-ish, everyone agrees that this is like kind of on a glide path. It's just a question of how soon it gets done. So for people like Senator Mike Lee or Rand Paul, among the people who want amendments voted on, they know that the amendments that they want voted on are still going to fail, but they just want to vote on it.
Yeah.
So that's what they're trying to put together right now with the reality check that everyone who's demanding an amendment vote is aware that this is not going to change the process substantively, and that's a good thing because any amendments that would have gotten passed through this process would mean you tack on more time because then this bill would have to go back to the House before it could go to the White House. That's not what we expect to happen right now, but it doesn't mean that the process isn't still slow before it can go fast.
I saw Mike Lee was not happy that more Democrats than Republicans supported this deal. He used that as proof that the deal is not a good deal. How much of a problem could that be for McCarthy down the road?
I mean, that's something that I think we're going to keep tracking. I was just listening right before I came on with you to Chip Roy, who was on a conservative radio show, and he's still griping about this in the same way that Mike Lee is griping about the fact that more Democrats voted for this in the House than Republicans did in the House. It's something that Chip Roy is talking about, too. Whether or not that actually amounts to some kind of massive motion to vacate battle, that's the next step in this. It's just not clear that that's exactly where it's going to go yet. Yesterday, when they were still in town on the House side, the vibe was finish the debt ceiling, then we'll move on. I'm just not really sure there's an appetite to move on, at least not yet.
Ali Vitale on Capitol Hill as we get ever closer to finishing this manufactured crisis. Ali Vitale, thank you. After the break, it is officially hurricane season, and between climate change and El Nino, we officially have no idea what to expect this season, but there's already a possibility of a dangerous storm forming in the Gulf right now. We're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The beginning of June means the beginning of hurricane season. And on this first day of June, the National Hurricane Center is already warning of a system in the Gulf of Mexico right now that could develop very quickly into the first tropical storm of 2023. The National Weather Service is referring to this right now as Invest 91L, but some weather watchers are referring to it as a blob. There's real uncertainty right now about what this hurricane season will look like because forecasters have no historical precedent for the current situation. There's record warm ocean temperatures combined with a likely El Nino. Chase Kane, climate editor with our NBC News partner LX News, explains how climate change is making hurricane season a lot more difficult to predict.
Ocean temperatures are breaking records by records, and that could have a profound impact on hurricane season. These lines show ocean temperatures back to 1981. The dark black line is this year. And look at just how much hotter it is.
Hurricanes are fueled by warm water, and the oceans now store about 90% of the extra heat that humans have added to the planet because of greenhouse gases.
You know, you're changing the physics, right? Hurricanes need warm ocean water to feed their engine, if you will. They evaporate water off the surface of the ocean. When the ocean is hotter, when that sea surface is hotter, you can evaporate that water with a greater ease. But the end result is that we're changing the speed limit on hurricanes.
Increasing research shows climate change lets hurricanes dump more rain, push more deadly storm surge ashore, and intensify more quickly. Last year, Hurricane Ian brought all three. The $114 billion storm killed 149. Nearly all died from flooding or storm surge amplified by sea level rise.
Storm surge, where we see the most damaging conditions and the most deaths.
The problem is that the interaction between storm surge and sea level rise is what we call non-linear, meaning they are sort of a multiplying effect on each other. So what we're trying to do is elevate the status of the storm surge warning and help people to understand that storm surge warning is as important and in some situations more important than the hurricane warning.
And then there are the carefree beaches of Southern California, usually shielded from tropical storms and hurricanes by the cool waters of the Pacific. But as the Pacific is warming along with all of our oceans from the effects of human-caused climate change, that protection, that shield is weakening a bit. And that's why for the first time this season, National Weather Service offices here in LA and in San Diego will have the ability to issue alerts for tropical storms and hurricanes. Consider that just last year, Kay brought flooding rains and tropical storm force winds to San Diego.
The big thing that climate change is doing is it makes the behavior of the storms different than in the past. So people that have lived in areas and have encountered hurricanes before, you really need to be aware that the storms we're dealing with now can be very, very different than the storms we were dealing with even 20 or 30 years ago.
And in the Atlantic Ocean, a forecast of El Nino usually means a somewhat quieter hurricane season, but it's possible that record warm ocean temperatures could cancel that effect.
And even if it ends up being a strong El Nino, I assure you it will not stop hurricanes from forming. And at this point, El Nino is nothing more than a distraction for hurricane preparedness.
So there are multiple things happening at once, many of them linked to climate change, and unfortunately, it's not a good picture.
Bottom line, these storms are going to be more powerful, but there might be fewer of them we think. Still to come, President Zelenskyy ups the pressure on NATO to admit Ukraine into the security alliance as Russia launches more deadly airstrikes on Kyiv. My one-on-one with the White House National Security Coordinator next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Once again, air raid sirens blared across Kyiv in the early morning as Russia continues to barrage the capital city with missile attacks. According to Ukrainian officials, Russia launched 10 missiles, all of which the country's air defense system was able to shoot down. But there were casualties from the falling debris caused by the intercepts. 3 people were killed, including a 9-year-old girl and her mother, and at least a dozen more were injured. Now, more than 15 months into this war, residents in Kyiv are once again finding themselves rushing to seek shelter from Russia's attack, just as they did in the early days of Moscow's invasion. All of this comes as Zelenskyy and European leaders gather in Moldova, where he pushed for an invitation to join the NATO alliance before the Defense Pact's summit this summer. So joining me now is National Security Council Strategic Communications Coordinator John Kirby. John, Admiral Kirby, always good to see you. Let me start with that question on NATO. Has America's position changed on this with Ukraine? It feels like France's has, that there is a growing number of NATO allies going, you know what, there's no fear of Russia anymore. Admitting Ukraine isn't some escalatory thing with Russia anymore. We shouldn't worry about that. We should protect Ukraine. Where are we on this?
Our policy hasn't changed at all, Chuck. I mean, we still obviously support NATO's open door, and what we've said and continue to say is that discussions about membership, that's got to be between the country in question and the alliance. We certainly recognize and respect that there's a process there. What we're focused on right now, and what we believe we need to be focused on right now, not just the United States, but our allies and partners around the world, is making sure that President Zelenskyy has all the tools and capabilities he needs to be successful here in the spring. Well, now it's almost summer,
right.
Summer months and weeks and months going ahead. Because if and when they choose to go on the offense, we want to make sure they're ready to do so, and that's where our heads are right now.
The munition issue. This has been something that has been of concern. As fast as we can send artillery, they seem to go through it. Are you confident we can keep them armed?
Basically, yes. We are working very, very hard to make sure that we can continue to get them additional arms and ammunition. You saw just yesterday we announced yet another package, and if you look at what's in there, it's almost all ammunition, whether it's artillery shells or our new interceptor missiles for the Patriots and new air defense munitions as well. It's all in there, and we're going to keep that going. We're roughly rolling out a new package of assistance every couple of weeks. We believe we've got the funding to continue to do that through the end of this fiscal year.
Let me stay with NATO issues here a minute. I know President Biden spoke with President Erdogan after his re-election in Turkey. Did the issue of Sweden's invitation come up? And if it did, what's your sense of whether Turkey is going to support it?
Well, yes, it did come up. The president reiterated our strong desire to see Sweden become a NATO ally, and we believe they'll be a great NATO ally. They've got a very modern, capable military, and we look forward to welcoming that military inside the alliance. As for the chances, we believe that we're going to get there. But obviously, President Erdogan has got to speak for his country's concerns, and he's done that. We know those conversations with Sweden are ongoing, but the president has said before, we're optimistic that we'll get there.
You know, when this war started, there were a lot of red lines that many folks thought Putin had when it came to the West, whether it was us or NATO, et cetera. And none of those red lines have, if we crossed them, Putin didn't enforce them. What have we learned about Putin and his bluster, and how much bluffing does he do? I mean, are we convinced now that he can't back up what he promises?
We've evolved the capabilities that we have provided to Ukraine as the war itself has evolved. That's really been the driving factors. What do the Ukrainians need now and in the weeks ahead? And so we're doing the best we can to provide those, because the war has changed. As you were alluding to in the opening there, I mean, you know, when they were going at Kyiv, it was really Stingers and Javelins, Javelin anti-tank missiles that the Ukrainians needed. And then as we got into, spring and summer, it really became air defense. And of course, we're still prioritizing air defense. And now, as they get ready for a counteroffensive sometime in the weeks and months ahead, they really need what we call combined arms capabilities, armor, artillery, and additional air defense and ammunition. So we're really focused on those. And those have changed over time, and that's really been the driver, not so much what red line Putin has put out there. Now, I will say, quite honestly, Chuck, and we've talked about this, we absolutely are concerned about escalation. We don't believe it would be responsible if we weren't thinking about the potential for this war to escalate beyond the level of violence that it's already visited upon the Ukrainian people.
The Ukrainian attacks in Moscow, I know what our official stance is, but do you think they're having an impact on Russia in a way that might actually be advantageous to Ukraine?
I think it's too soon to tell, to be honest with you. I mean, these have just happened in recent days and weeks. We've seen some reaction out of the Russians in terms of their own force protection, but it's too soon to know whether this is going to be some kind of a game changer. I want to stress again, we do not support attacks on Russian soil. We do not encourage or enable the Ukrainians to do that.
Right. You know, that if they didn't want to be attacked, they shouldn't attack another country, is probably a reminder to Mr. Putin. Very quickly, China. I know President Biden, Secretary Blinken, there's this desire to de-escalate. It looks like the Chinese do not have a desire to de-escalate. The ignoring of Secretary Austin by his counterpart in China. I thought China wanted to de-escalate. Are we getting mixed messages, or is this decidedly they want to have a more confrontational approach?
I think in general the president is optimistic that we're going to be able to get all the lines of communication back open. Most of them still are, Chuck. I mean, we still have an embassy there in Beijing. We still have the ability to communicate directly with the PRC. Now, this military channel has been closed down since then Speaker Pelosi visited Taiwan, and we want to get that back open, and that's one of the reasons why we want to get Secretary Blinken on an airplane over to Beijing as soon as is practical, so that he can start to open up some of those shutdown lines of communication. When you look at what happened over the weekend with the intercept, unsafe and unprofessional intercept over the South China Sea, that's a classic example of why it's really important to get these military channels back open.
John Kirby, the National Security Coordinator, retired Admiral. Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure to get your perspective. And thank you all for being with us this hour. By the way, in the 3 minutes that I was interviewing John Kirby, the Hurricane Center has upgraded that storm. It is now a tropical depression in the Gulf. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson, and I'm sure she's going to hit that weather system as well right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.